He was barely a month old, a golden retriever puppy, soaked, silent, and sinking fast, left to drown in the middle of a freezing lake. No one saw, no one cared, except Jack, a tired roofer, alone in a boat, who heard a sound that shouldn't have existed, a cry beneath the wind. He jumped in. No plan, no hesitation. What he found tangled around that puppy's neck. It told a story darker than the water itself. What happened next? You'll never forget. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe even the smallest life matters, hit that subscribe button. Because this story, it's going to change the way you see second chances. The sound shattered the stillness, sharp, wet, frantic. It wasn't a bird call, nor the moan of shifting ice. It was higher, thinner, as if someone had bottled terror and cracked it open across the lake. Jack Miller heard it a second before he saw the ripples. The tiny golden shape was barely visible, maybe 30 yards from the canoe, thrashing wildly, then suddenly still. He moved before he had time to think. The fishing pole dropped to the bottom of the boat with a hollow clatter. Jack kicked off his worn boots, tore his flannel jacket from his back, and dove straight into the lake, arms slicing into the frigid water. It hit him like a punch to the lungs. Pine Lake in late spring was still cruelly cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountains above Northwood. It stole breath, froze joints, shocked the chest, but Jack didn't stop. He swam hard, head down, eyes burning from the cold, hands searching through reeds and current until he felt it. Fur, soft, limp. He grabbed and pulled. A puppy, a golden retriever puppy, no bigger than his forearm. Wet fur clung to its thin frame, and its legs dangled lifeless. Its tiny mouth hung open, eyes half closed, and no sound came from its throat. But it was still warm. Jack cradled the pup to his chest, turned back toward the canoe, and kicked furiously. Each stroke burned, muscles screaming, but he didn't let go. Not now, not after what he'd just seen. By the time he dragged himself over the side of the boat, water pouring off him in sheets, his hands were trembling so badly he could hardly secure the paddle. The puppy lay silent on the metal bottom, limbs askew, chest still. "No," Jack muttered, voice rough. "No, not like this." He tilted the pup's head gently, placed 2 fingers on its tiny ribs, and began compressions. His touch was shaky but steady. 1, 2, 3, pause. Again, nothing. "Come on," he growled. "Come on, kid. Breathe." Then, a twitch. Barely a flicker, but it was there. A cough, sharp and gurgling, expelled lake water from its throat. The puppy gasped, shallow and weak, but it was breath. It was life. Jack wrapped it in his soaked flannel, held it close to his chest, and exhaled as if he hadn't taken a breath in 10 minutes. Then, shaking from adrenaline, he yanked the motor cord with numb fingers and turned the boat toward the shore. 2 hours earlier, Pine Lake had been serene. Located just outside the modest town of Northwood, Oregon, the lake was ringed by tall, silent pine trees and fed by 3 narrow streams from the Cascades. The town itself wasn't much, population under 4,000, mostly old folks, contractors, and people too stubborn or too broke to leave. The sun was up, though barely breaking through the thin veil of clouds. April in Northwood was fickle. The previous night had dropped to near freezing. Jack had noticed frost on the dockboards that morning. He'd driven up before dawn, his rusted blue pickup groaning over the dirt road that wound along the edge of the lake. The usual Thursday ritual: coffee from his old thermos, baited line dropped over the side of the canoe, and silence. No roof calls today, no shingles, no ladders, just pine, water, and time. Jack Miller, 48, was a man carved from labor, a thick frame gone slightly soft at the belly, hands calloused and scarred. His hair, once jet black, now bore streaks of gray, trimmed short with the same pocket knife he used for everything else. Stubble shaded his square jaw, and his nose had a slight bend from a teenage fistfight that broke more than his pride. He wasn't bitter, not exactly, but he carried his solitude like a habit. He had loved once, deeply, and lost early. Carla had died a week after their daughter was born, and the daughter, Madison, had moved away years ago. They talked, now and then, but mostly it was just him and the lake. Jack didn't talk to many people in town unless they needed their roofs patched. He didn't go to church or bars, but he showed up when someone needed a generator hauled or a snowed-in driveway cleared. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't cold either, just distant, like someone living on the edge of something he couldn't quite name. The lake, though, that he understood. Its quiet, its distance, its moods. But now that quiet had been broken, and in its place was a whimpering bundle of fur fighting to stay alive. The canoe hit the dock hard, scraping against warped boards. Jack didn't slow down. He leapt out, puppy still wrapped against his chest, and ran toward the truck parked in gravel nearby. The old blue pickup roared to life on the first try. He threw it into gear with one hand, while the other held the trembling bundle to his chest.
"You hang in there," he muttered. "We're not done yet."
The engine growled as he sped down the dirt road, tires kicking up dust and bits of spring frost. His destination? Northwood Veterinary Clinic, 15 minutes away if he pushed it. And he would. The truck skidded slightly as Jack took the last turn too fast, tires spitting gravel across the lot of the Northwood Veterinary Clinic. The faded blue sign out front wobbled in the breeze. Northwood Vet, for all creatures, great and small. He slammed the truck into park, yanked the door open and bolted across the short sidewalk with the bundled, silent puppy clenched to his chest. The glass door flew open under his shoulder. Inside, the clinic smelled like antiseptic and damp fur. Jack's boots left muddy streaks on the tile as he shouted, "Emergency! He's not breathing!" Behind the front desk, a petite woman with silver hair and a loose bun and half-moon glasses perched on her nose jumped up. Her name tag read Marla. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, but she moved like lightning. Through the back. "Exam room 2, she barked, pointing past a swinging door. Jack didn't pause to thank her. He shoved through the door into a bright, sterile room where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the stainless steel table gleamed cold and unforgiving. "Put him down, gently," came a voice from behind him. Dr. Sarah Whitmore entered without ceremony, her long legs carrying her across the room in brisk strides. She was in her early 40s, tall and lithe, with chestnut brown hair pulled into a braid that draped over her shoulder like rope. Her face bore the traces of sun and time. Crow's feet near alert green eyes, freckles on pale skin, and a calmness that suggested she'd long made peace with panic. Years of emergency farm visits and late-night calls from frantic owners had shaped her into a quiet, deliberate force. Jack did as instructed, lowering the pup onto the table with the same gentleness he might have used laying down a newborn. I pulled him out of the lake. He wasn't moving. I did compressions. He coughed once, but he's not breathing again. Sarah's hands were already working, pressing her stethoscope to the tiny chest. Golden retriever, male, young, 4-5 weeks at most. Hypothermia, weak pulse, barely detectable. A second vet tech, a tall man with a lean frame and warm brown skin, slipped into the room. His name tag read Avery. His hair was buzzed close, and a neat goatee framed his serious mouth. He had a calm, almost meditative presence, like someone used to holding life by a thread. Avery had served as a field medic before returning to civilian life, something Jack would only learn much later. "Hot blankets," Sarah said. "Avery, oxygen mask. Let's get a line in. He's slipping." Jack stepped back, soaked to the bone, arms hanging heavy at his sides. Water dripped from his jeans and pooled around his boots, but he didn't move. Couldn't. Avery placed the tiniest oxygen mask Jack had ever seen over the puppy's nose. Sarah gently rubbed the pup's limbs, trying to stimulate circulation. Another assistant, young, red-haired, nervous, brought a heated pad and plugged it into the wall. "Come on," Sarah muttered, more to the dog than to anyone. "There's still something in you, little guy. I can feel it." Jack watched the puppy's body. It lay unnaturally still, golden fur now darkened with lake water, ears flat, legs slightly twisted. The fur on his belly was patchy, signs of neglect, maybe worse. His ribs pressed against the skin like thin twigs. He was alone, Jack said, mostly to himself. Middle of the lake, just floating there. Sarah didn't look up. "If he was there long, it's a miracle you even saw him." "I didn't see him. I heard him," Jack said, voice hoarse. A scream. "Even more of a miracle then," she murmured. The puppy coughed again, barely a twitch in the ribs, but enough to make Avery pause. Sarah glanced up, eyes sharp. "That's something. We've got a reflex." The oxygen flowed. The heating pad glowed orange beneath the blankets. Jack stared, unblinking, willing the pup to move again. "Do you have a name for him?" Marla asked softly from the door. Jack blinked, as if coming up from underwater. No, not yet. Sarah looked up. Sometimes it helps, she said gently. Jack looked down at the trembling form on the table. He swallowed, slowly. Sonny, he whispered, if he makes it through this, he's gonna need some light. No one said anything for a moment. The name lingered in the air, delicate and defiant. Time passed in a slow drip. A machine beeped faintly in the background. Jack's wet shirt clung to his arms. His hands, still trembling, curled into fists at his side. Then, suddenly, a real breath. A deep, ragged inhale. Sonny's body twitched, head moving slightly. One paw flexed. Sarah leaned in, stethoscope against the chest again. Lungs are working. It's weak, but it's there. Jack exhaled hard. Sonny was still unconscious, his breathing shallow, but the color in his gums had shifted from a dangerous blue-gray to a pale pink. We've got him stabilized, for now, Sarah said, her tone cautious but no longer grim. We'll need to monitor for the next few hours. He's not out of the woods yet, but... She allowed herself a tiny smile. He's fighting. Jack felt something stir in his chest. He wasn't used to it, not lately. How long before he can go home? He asked. Not today, Sarah said, but possibly tomorrow. He'll need warmth, rest, low stress, a quiet place. Can you provide that? Jack nodded, instantly. Yes, I live alone. Got a wood stove, plenty of blankets. He won't be alone again. Sarah studied him for a beat, this big, soaking wet man with the hard face and soft eyes. She'd seen worse owners, far worse. She nodded. We'll keep him overnight, but if his vitals hold steady, you can take him in the morning. Jack looked at the fragile form under the blanket. He reached out, one rough finger touching Sonny's paw. It was still cold, but not ice anymore. He turned to Marla. Do you take payment plans? Marla smiled gently. We'll figure it out. Let's focus on saving him first. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. He stood there a moment longer, then turned toward the door. I'll be back at dawn, he said, voice gravel and rust. Outside, the wind had shifted. The air smelled less like ice and more like rain. He climbed into the truck, heart still racing, and drove home without turning on the radio. The passenger seat was empty now, but not for long. The sky was still dim when Jack pulled into the gravel lot outside the clinic the next morning, the first silver traces of dawn just beginning to stretch across the treetops. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of melting frost and damp pine needles. Jack stepped out of the truck, coffee in hand, his boots crunching the ground beneath him. His shoulders were stiff from a sleepless night, but his chest carried an anxious, hopeful weight. Inside, the lights were already on. Marla, the silver-haired receptionist from the day before, sat behind the counter wrapped in a thick blue cardigan. Her face lit up slightly as Jack walked in, the bell over the door chiming. Morning, she said gently, adjusting her glasses. You're early. I said I'd be, Jack replied, his voice rasping like old gravel. He looked tired, worn jeans, flannel shirt, still smelling faintly of lake water and firewood, stubble creeping over his chin. But his eyes searched the clinic for only one thing. He made it through the night, Marla said, nodding. Sarah's checking on him now. Jack let out a slow breath and leaned on the counter, one hand gripping the edge like it might float away if he didn't. I want to see him. She stood up and waved him through the swinging door. Exam room 1. She figured you'd come early. He found Sarah inside, crouched beside a small crate lined with warm towels. She wore the same forest green scrubs, her braid now tucked into a messy bun, and her eyes were alert, despite what must have been a long night. She had that calm, unshakable presence again, the kind that comes from years of riding the line between life and loss. Sonny was curled on his side, breathing shallow but steady. The pup's fur was still damp in places, but cleaner now, and a small patch on his back had begun to fluff again under the warmth. His eyes, golden hazel and slightly cloudy with fatigue, blinked once when he saw Jack. He's alert, Sarah said, standing. Still weak, but stable. Took some broth through a syringe last night. Held it down. Jack approached slowly. He knelt beside the crate and held out his hand, palm up. Sonny sniffed once, then nudged it weakly with his nose. That's a good sign, Sarah added. Recognition, memory. He knows you. Jack said nothing. He reached in and gently scratched behind Sonny's ear, and the puppy let out a breathy sigh, one paw twitching. He can go home today, Sarah continued, walking toward the counter to fill out paperwork. But he needs round-the-clock warmth, soft food, and absolutely no stress. Think you can handle that? Jack nodded. Yeah, I can. Sarah paused, studying him. You live alone? Jack hesitated, then said, Yeah, since my wife passed. His voice flattened slightly. 7 years ago. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Jack looked at her for a moment. Me too. He stood, rubbing his stiff knees. So, what do I owe you? Sarah glanced at the clipboard. Marla said you asked about payment plans. Don't worry about it now. Let's just get him through the week. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Thanks. She smiled, small and genuine. Take good care of him, Mr. Miller. Call me Jack. All right then, Jack. Take care of Sonny. At home, Jack laid Sonny gently on a thick wool blanket near the wood stove. The small cabin was warm, the scent of cedar and old fire settling into the air. He filled a ceramic bowl with warm water and set it next to the puppy, then sat down on the floor beside him. Sonny sniffed the bowl, then tentatively took a sip. Just one, but it was enough. Jack smiled and leaned back against the couch. The silence in the cabin, which for years had felt like an anchor, now felt thinner. Not gone, but different. That afternoon, Jack brought out a small wooden crate from the attic. An old thing, dusty, with hand-sewn linen still folded inside. It had belonged to his daughter Madison when she was a baby. He hadn't touched it in years. As he laid it near the fire, Sonny stirred and blinked up at him, then curled tighter into the blanket. Later, Jack fed him soft chicken broth with a spoon. Sonny licked at it slowly, his little tongue trembling with the effort. After the third spoonful, the puppy gave a small, almost inaudible whine, then crawled forward with effort and nudged Jack's hand. Jack let him crawl into his lap. The little golden body was warm now, barely, but enough to feel real, alive. Jack looked down at him. You're a tough little guy, he murmured. Bet you've seen more in 1 month than most folks do in a year. Sonny blinked slowly, and then, tentatively, nuzzled into Jack's chest, curling under the flap of his open flannel shirt. Jack didn't move. He let the puppy rest, his chin dipping slowly to the top of Sonny's head. He closed his eyes. That night, as the wind picked up outside, Jack lay on the couch with Sonny asleep on a folded towel on his chest. The fire crackled low. The shadows moved slowly on the log walls. Jack's mind wandered back. Carla's laugh in the kitchen, the sound of rain on the tin roof, Madison's small feet running across the porch. That house had once been full of sound, full of life. Then it wasn't. But now something was changing. Just before drifting off, he felt Sonny shift in his sleep. The puppy's tiny head burrowed under Jack's collarbone, and for the first time in years, Jack didn't dream of silence. It started with a sound, barely more than a ripple. The sink faucet dripping, a sudden splash of dishwater, even the gurgle of the radiator in the hallway when it first kicked on. Each time, Sonny's body stiffened like a coiled spring. His tail tucked low, ears flattened, and his eyes, those amber eyes now clearer with each passing day, searched wildly for an escape. Jack noticed it first that second morning at home. He had run the kitchen tap for a moment, just enough to rinse out a cup, and Sonny, who had been resting near the stove, suddenly scrambled backward, claws scratching against the wooden floor, as if something invisible were chasing him. He had retreated under the couch, his body trembling. Jack crouched beside him, whispering softly, coaxing, but Sonny would not come out. The same thing happened again later, when Jack accidentally knocked over a kettle filled halfway with water. It clanged against the floor and splashed its contents across the tile. Sonny barked, sharp, panicked, and bolted, curling against the back of Jack's recliner, like a leaf curling from frost. It wasn't just water, it was the sound of water. The next morning, Jack tried taking him out toward the edge of the property. The path behind the house led to a clearing overlooking Pine Lake. Spring was stretching its legs slowly, melting frost, dripping trees, a few birds returning. The lake shimmered silver under the hesitant sun. Jack thought it might do Sonny some good to smell the open air. But as they neared the tree line and the lake came into view, Sonny stopped. Then he backed up. 2 steps, then 3, his breath coming fast. He let out a sudden bark, loud and piercing, then began to whimper, eyes locked on the water like it had teeth. Jack didn't pull him forward. Instead, he knelt beside him, his hand resting lightly on the pup's back. Sonny was shaking, not from cold, from memory. Jack's mind turned over something he hadn't dared say out loud. Not even to Sarah when she asked how Sonny ended up in the lake. What if he hadn't fallen in? What if someone put him there? Later that day, Jack stood on the dock again, alone this time. Sonny was resting back at the cabin, curled on his flannel shirt. The lake looked as it always had, peaceful, still, unbothered. But something in Jack couldn't let it go. He let his eyes trace the shoreline to the eastern bend, near the thicket of cattails where he had first seen the golden blur. The water there was shallower, filled with reeds and driftwood. He unmoored the canoe and paddled in silence. The air grew cooler as he moved through the channel. The sun dipped behind clouds. The trees here were denser, older. The lake narrowed as it neared the bank, and then he saw it. Half sunken in the mud, nearly hidden among the reeds, was the wreckage of a small wooden rowboat. It was charred along one edge, as if fire had once kissed it, then walked away. The hull was cracked, slumped at an awkward angle, waterlogged and broken. Jack stepped into the shallows, boots sinking into the muck, and waded toward it. A frayed rope still hung from a splintered post on the stern, trailing into the lake like an accusation. Something tugged in his gut as he bent down, brushing aside lakeweed and mud. There, caught on a jagged nail near the bow, was a shred of fabric, blue, sun-bleached, soaked. He reached for it, pulling it free. It matched perfectly the torn ribbon Sarah had removed from Sonny's neck at the clinic. A knot formed in Jack's stomach. The rope hadn't been tied for docking. It had been looped, rough, careless, likely around something small, a puppy. Jack stood motionless for a long while, the sound of the lake lapping at the wreckage the only noise in the world. The weight of it settled over him. Someone had tied Sonny, placed him in a sinking boat, and left. Not by mistake, not a careless accident, but with intent, with finality. And somehow, Sonny had broken free. That night, Jack sat on the porch long after the sun disappeared. The fire in the stove crackled behind him. Sonny lay beside his boot, curled tightly, head resting on Jack's sock. Jack ran a hand gently across the pup's back. He didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say, but he made a promise, one he didn't voice out loud. He would find out who did it. And he'd make damn sure Sonny never felt that kind of fear again. The next day, Jack visited Sarah at the clinic. She greeted him outside, wearing a navy coat over her scrubs. Her braid hung lower today, loosely tied, and she looked more tired than usual, rubbing one temple as if holding off a headache. "He's still okay?" she asked as he stepped out of the truck. Jack nodded. "Still eating, still resting, but I've found something." He told her about the wrecked boat, the rope, the fabric. Sarah listened in silence. When he finished, she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "I had a feeling," she said finally. "That ribbon, it wasn't from a collar. Too old, too flimsy. Someone tried to kill him," Jack said, and it wasn't a question. Sarah met his eyes. "Yeah, but he didn't let them." They stood in silence for a long minute. Then she added, "You should report it." "To who? Sheriff will laugh it off. No collar, no witness, just a guy and a puppy." "Maybe," she hesitated, "but maybe not. I know someone." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Eli Foster," she said, "retired detective, works part-time with animal control now. He's tough, but fair. Big guy, walks with a limp, talks slow. Lost his dog in a fire 3 years ago, took early retirement after that. He's not the type to dismiss this." Jack nodded slowly. "All right, give me his number." Sarah scribbled it on a sticky note and handed it over. "Jack?" "Yeah? Thanks for not walking away." He looked at her, something unreadable flickering across his face. Wasn't really a choice. That night, Jack placed the torn blue fabric in a small metal tin, along with a photo he had taken of the boat. He set the tin on a shelf beside the fireplace, just above Sonny's bed. Sonny stirred in his sleep, legs twitching. Jack reached down, fingers brushing the pup's ear.
You're not a mistake, he murmured. You're a survivor.
Sonny didn't wake, but he leaned closer. The first time Jack placed a bowl of water next to the wood stove after the incident, he did it deliberately. Not with carelessness, but with calm, steady hands. He didn't set it down quickly or suddenly. He let Sonny see the bowl, let him smell the steam, let him choose. Sonny watched from across the room, eyes wide, tail low, but not tucked. He took one step, then paused, another, then stopped. Jack didn't coax him. He didn't say a word. He simply sipped his own coffee and looked out the window as if nothing in the world depended on the moment. That was the trick, he'd realized. No pressure, no noise, no need for bravery, just presence. It took nearly 15 minutes, but eventually, Sonny crept forward and drank. 3 slow licks, a quiet victory. Later that day, Jack moved the water bowl a foot closer to the open back door. The sound of snowmelt dripping from the roof outside echoed softly against the porch. Sonny hesitated again, then came, more confidently this time. That was how the days went, inch by inch. Jack taught Sonny that not every drop meant danger, that not every ripple led to drowning. By the end of the week, Sonny was resting on the porch in the mornings, his head tilted toward the wind. He no longer flinched at the distant sound of waves slapping against the lake's edge. He didn't bark or tremble when Jack filled the kettle. The trauma hadn't vanished, but it had loosened its grip. On Thursday, Jack took him to the lake. Not all the way, not yet, but close enough to hear the breeze ripple through the reeds. He brought a blanket and a thermos of broth and sat beneath a pine tree, letting Sonny choose how far he wanted to go. The dog's golden coat was beginning to shine again in patches. He had put on some weight, though his ribs still showed in certain lights. His eyes, brighter now, more curious, scanned the tree line and then, gradually, turned toward the water. Jack didn't watch him. He sipped quietly, feeling the sun on his face. Sonny walked toward the shoreline, 5 feet, then 10. Then, for the first time since Jack had pulled him from the lake, he sat down, just sat, and looked at the water. He didn't shake. He didn't turn away. Jack said nothing, but his heart beat loud in his chest. That weekend, Jack found himself downtown for the first time in months. Sonny rode with him, head resting on the dashboard of the truck, ears flopping with each bump in the road. He looked every bit the part of a loyal companion now, even if he was still recovering. Northwood wasn't much of a town. A grocery store, a diner, a repair shop, and a small church where Jack hadn't set foot since Carla's funeral. But word traveled fast in small places, and the sight of Jack, solitary, gruff Jack, with a golden puppy beside him, was enough to make people talk. At the feed store, an older woman with thick glasses and a purple jacket named Donna Keller knelt to scratch Sonny's head. "Well, I'll be," she chuckled. "Is this the little fella I heard about from Sarah?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Already a celebrity?" "Oh, honey," she said, adjusting her scarf. "This town hasn't had anything sweet to gossip about since the hardware store caught fire in 21. Jack smiled, barely. Sonny licked Donna's hand, tail thumping softly. "I remember when Carla brought you here with that big black lab," she added, standing up. "Milo, wasn't it?" "Yeah," Jack said, his voice quieter. "He passed before she did." Donna patted his arm, her touch light. "Then it's about damn time you found another heartbeat." Jack didn't answer, but Sonny nuzzled into his leg, and that was response enough. Back home, Sonny surprised him again. Jack had laid down his coat near the hearth while chopping kindling outside. When he returned, the puppy was curled on the coat, head resting atop Jack's tool belt, eyes fluttering with sleep. That night, he woke up to find Sonny nestled against his side in the bed. Not on the blanket, not on the floor, right beside him, his body warm and heavy with trust. Jack didn't move. He lay there in the dark, staring at the rafters, remembering how long the bed had felt empty, how many nights he'd slept with one hand stretched across the mattress out of habit, only to find it cold. He placed his hand gently on Sonny's back. "You're staying," he whispered. "Aren't you?" Sonny shifted slightly, pressed his nose into the crook of Jack's arm, and exhaled. The following week, Sarah called. "You busy?" she asked, her voice steady as ever. "Always," Jack replied, standing in his doorway with a wrench in one hand. "You feel like coming to town for a bit of a surprise?" "I don't do surprises," he said. "You'll want this one." He hesitated. "Sonny too?" "Especially Sonny." They drove to the library. Jack hadn't been inside since Madison was 12, and obsessed with books about wolves and volcanoes. He stepped in, uneasy. Sarah stood by a long table covered in cupcakes, flyers, and a cardboard sign painted in cheerful blue. A second chance, pet adoption fair. "What is this?" Jack asked, frowning at the balloons. Sarah crossed her arms, amused. "You're the unofficial mascot." He looked down. Sonny sat beside him, ears perked, tail wagging as children rushed up to pet him. He didn't shy away. He didn't bark. He just... accepted them, trusted them. Jack blinked slowly, overwhelmed. A local reporter, a young man with freckles and a camera slung around his neck, approached.
Mind if I get a photo? They said this is the dog from the lake.
Jack hesitated, then nodded. The shutter clicked. That photo would appear in the town's weekly paper 2 days later with the headline, "The Puppy Who Wouldn't Drown."
Back at home, Jack pinned the article to the corkboard in his kitchen, next to a faded photo of Carla and Madison.
He looked at Sonny, now sprawled upside down in the armchair, snoring softly. "Not bad, huh?" he said. Sonny didn't answer, but Jack could have sworn he smiled in his sleep. The wind began whispering before sundown, curling through the pine trees like a warning. Jack stood on the porch with a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, eyes scanning the treetops. The sky had turned a dull pewter, thick with clouds that churned with something more than rain. He'd seen weather like this before, spring storms that arrived like arguments, sudden and violent. Inside, Sonny lay curled on the rug, tail twitching in his sleep. The fire crackled softly, and the house smelled of cedar and warm bread from a loaf Jack had baked earlier that afternoon. A new habit, one he hadn't thought himself capable of picking up again. As the first drops began to patter against the windows, Jack double-checked the latches, threw another log on the fire, and filled the water bowls. He left the back porch light on, just in case. By nightfall, the storm had arrived in full. Thunder rolled like a freight train, and the wind howled against the roof with long, moaning wails. Rain battered the siding and sheets. Jack sat in the armchair, book half forgotten on his lap, eyes flicking to the window every few minutes. Sonny paced restlessly at his feet, ears flicking, muscles tense. "It's all right, boy," Jack said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "We're in for the night." But Sonny didn't settle. His nose twitched, and then he barked. Once sharply, then again, then he bolted. Jack stood, startled. "What is it?" Sonny was already at the back door, pawing, whining, tail stiff. Jack opened it, just a crack, and saw nothing but darkness and pouring rain. Then came a new sound, cracking wood. Jack's gut dropped. He threw on his coat and boots, grabbed the flashlight from the shelf, and followed Sonny out into the storm. The backyard was chaos. Branches whipped in the wind. Pine needles flew like darts. Jack swung the light toward the chicken coop and froze. The roof had collapsed. A massive limb, easily 12 feet long, had broken clean from the tree above and smashed down over the chicken wire. Feathers floated in the air like snow, and Sonny was already there, barking like mad, scrambling against the fallen limb, nose buried in the shattered boards. "Sonny!" Jack shouted, heart pounding. He slogged through mud and water, boots sucking against the ground. He reached the coop just as Sonny squeezed beneath the lowest part of the fallen branch, barking into the dark interior. One hen was already out, flapping wildly across the yard. But there were more inside, trapped. Jack dropped to his knees, began pulling debris aside, wood splintering in his hands. The wind screamed louder. Then his boot slipped on a patch of wet leaves, and he went down hard, his leg twisting beneath the weight of his own body. Pain shot through his thigh and up into his back like lightning. He tried to push himself up, but his leg was pinned under a side post. "Damn it," he hissed. He struggled once more, but the post didn't budge. His hands slipped in the mud. "Sonny!" The dog's head appeared around the edge of the coop, soaked through, eyes wild and bright. He ran to Jack's side, whined, then turned back toward the house, then to Jack again. He let out a long, piercing bark, not of panic, but of purpose. "Go!" Jack shouted. "Get help, boy! Go!" Sonny hesitated a moment longer, then ran. The nearest neighbor was nearly 2 acres away, past a thin trail that cut through the woods and opened onto a gravel road. It wasn't far, but in a storm like this, it might as well have been miles. The house belonged to Rick Delaney, a former auto mechanic in his late 60s, with a belly like a beer barrel and arms like old lumber. He had retired early after a back injury and spent most days fixing lawnmowers in his garage and yelling at the squirrels who stole seed from his feeders. He lived alone, save for an overweight orange tabby named Baxter. Rick was just settling into his recliner with a ham sandwich when he heard the first bark. It was distant, sharp, again, closer. Then a knock, no, a thump, against the front screen. He opened the door, half expecting wind to punch him in the face, and instead found a soaking wet golden puppy, barking up at him like the world depended on it. "Whoa now," he muttered. "What in the—" He recognized the dog. Everyone did. Sonny? The dog barked again, turned, sprinted into the darkness, then came back, barked, ran again. Rick didn't wait. He pulled on his coat, shoved his boots on over mismatched socks, grabbed a flashlight, and followed. They found Jack half-conscious in the mud, one leg trapped beneath the broken post, blood trickling from his forehead. "Hold on, Jack," Rick called, running toward him. "Gotcha!" Between the two of them, Rick pushing, Sonny pulling at the corner of Jack's coat with his teeth, they managed to shift the post just enough to drag Jack free. Rick helped him to his feet. "Leg's not broken," Jack grunted, testing it. "Just banged up." Rick's light scanned the collapsed coop. Two hens flapped around the debris, startled but unharmed. Sonny stood proudly next to them, drenched, panting hard, but tail wagging like he'd just won a medal. Later that night, Jack lay on the couch with an ice pack pressed against his leg and a blanket over his shoulders. Rick sat in the kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee, while Sonny dozed on the floor, belly rising and falling with steady breath. "You got yourself a damn good dog," Rick said, not looking up. Jack nodded. "He saved 'em, all of 'em. Saved you, too." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he looked at the sleeping pup. The same one he had pulled out of the water not 3 weeks ago. The one someone had tried to drown. The one who now barked in the face of thunder and ran through the storm to fetch help. A protector, not just saved, transformed. By early May, the pines had darkened to their deepest greens, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers instead of frost. The storm had passed, and with it, the last true bite of winter. Jack Miller sat on the tailgate of his old truck, squinting up at the roof of a neighbor's house. The shingles were worn, many warped from years of weather, and a few were entirely gone. He sipped his thermos of coffee and took a slow breath. Sonny lay nearby in the truck bed, head perched over the side, tail wagging slightly. His coat had filled in almost completely now, a thick golden shimmer that caught the sun like brushed copper. He was 7 weeks old, nearly twice the size he'd been when Jack pulled him from the lake, and full of energy that burned off in sharp bursts of running and barking, followed by hours of napping in the shade. Jack stood and patted the truck's side panel. "Let's get to work." Sonny jumped down with a light thud and trotted behind him as Jack opened the truck's side box, pulling out his tool belt. The belt was worn leather, the pouches faded, and the hammer hook slightly bent, but it fit Jack's hips like it had for decades. "Don't chew the chalk line," Jack warned, as Sonny nosed at the pouch curiously. The house belonged to Marjorie Tillman, a widow in her 70s with bright white hair and sun-wrinkled skin. She opened the screen door with a smile, holding a tray of lemonade and cookies like she'd been expecting guests all morning. "You sure you're okay climbing up there?" she asked Jack, her voice gravelly but sweet. "After what happened with the coop?" Jack gave her a wry smile. "Nothing's broken but my pride." Sonny barked once, as if in agreement. Marjorie leaned down and scratched behind his ear. "He looks good. Looks like he's meant to be beside you." Jack looked down at the pup. "He is." By mid-afternoon, the roof was half done. Jack wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his arm, watching Sonny chase a beetle across the yard below. A warm breeze kicked up, and for a moment, Jack just stood there, on the ridge of someone's house, hammer in hand, looking down on a life he never thought he'd rebuild. After the storm, the phone had started ringing, quietly at first, then more steadily. People needed help with their roofs, repairs, patching, full retiling, and most of them wanted the man who had saved the dog. Jack hadn't intended to go back to work full-time, but the calls came and the offers followed, and somewhere along the way, he'd remembered what it felt like to build something again. Something that kept the rain out, something that sheltered. And Sonny, he came along every time. At the second job, he'd barked to alert Jack when a ladder shifted unexpectedly. On the third, he'd nosed a pile of nails just seconds before a child almost stepped on them barefoot. Sarah had even dropped by during one job, leaning against her SUV with her arms crossed, as she watched Jack toss shingles across a roof, like he was 20 again. Her braid was tighter that day, her scrubs cleaner, but her smile was warm. "You look better," she said. Jack smirked. "Getting less sleep, eating more leftovers, covered in dog hair. Must be thriving." Sonny, flopped beside her feet, had thumped his tail against her boot in agreement. As spring gave way to summer, the town of Northwood began preparing for its annual Heritage Days, an unassuming 2-day festival of homemade pies, banjo music, vintage tractors, and awkward tug-of-war contests between local businesses. This year, something new had been added to the agenda. On the final day, a small crowd gathered around the makeshift gazebo in the town square. Bunting hung from trees. The smell of grilled corn filled the air. Children in sun hats clutched balloon animals, and a teenager from the high school brass band squeaked uncertainly through a rendition of America the Beautiful. Mayor Catherine Huxley, a tall, wiry woman with cropped silver hair and a blazer that seemed far too warm for the day, stepped up to the mic. She adjusted her reading glasses and smiled out at the crowd. "We don't often hand out medals in Northwood," she said. "We're not a town of pageants or parades, but every once in a while, someone or something reminds us what courage looks like." She gestured to the left of the stage. Jack, looking mildly uncomfortable in his cleanest jeans and a button-down that hadn't seen daylight since Carla's funeral, stepped forward. Sonny trotted beside him, wearing a red bandana printed with white stars. "He was abandoned, nearly drowned, left for gone," the mayor continued, "but he survived. And then he saved. He saved chickens, he saved a man, and more than that, he reminded this town that hope floats." A small laugh rippled through the crowd. "Today, we honor Sonny, Northwood's own pup of hope." The crowd clapped, then cheered, then whistled. Sonny barked once, startled by the noise, then sat with dignity as the mayor leaned down and clipped a small bronze medallion to his collar. It read simply, "For loyalty and bravery, 25. Jack looked down at Sonny, his hand resting on the dog's back. The moment didn't feel loud or grand. It felt quiet and full, like a room with the windows finally open. That night, Jack sat on the porch, boots off, feet resting on the railing. Sonny was stretched out beside him, belly in the air, paws twitching in a dream. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like someone had flung a handful of salt into the dark. Jack tilted his head back and watched them. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like something was missing. He looked at Sonny. From the middle of a lake, tied and tossed like garbage, to this porch with a medal and a home. Jack reached down, ran his fingers gently through the golden fur. "You made it, kid," he whispered. "You made it all the way." Sonny didn't move, but his tail gave one soft thump against the floorboards. Sometimes miracles don't come with trumpets or shining light from the heavens. Sometimes they come in the shape of a soaked little puppy pulled from a freezing lake. And the quiet man who chose not to walk away. Sonny wasn't just rescued, he was sent. A reminder that no matter how deep the water, no matter how dark the day, God's grace can find its way to shore. Not every miracle looks divine. Some bark, some limp, some simply lay beside us and teach us how to feel again. So, tonight, wherever you are, on a quiet porch, in a noisy city, alone or surrounded, believe this: there is still good in the world.
There is still light in forgotten places.
And sometimes the smallest souls carry the largest pieces of heaven. May God bless you, your home, and the animals you love. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story with someone who needs a little hope. Like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, because someone out there is still waiting to be rescued.